Hi class, this is Steve Dwinells. I'm your instructor for this course, Intro to Philosophy. What I'm going to try to do is middle of the week or so, Wednesday or Thursday, I'm going to try to post a short video clip which hopefully will explain the chapter that you've read, or at least hit some of the high points to try to explain some of it in regular terms. A couple things on this first video. First, if you would look at who the author of your textbook is, it is Helen Buss Mitchell. It's pretty clear as you begin to read the book that she comes at some of the issues from a feminist perspective. Nothing wrong with that. Every author of every textbook comes to the table with their own perspective and their own worldview. The important thing to remember, though, no matter who you're reading, is that particular worldview they're coming from. So as you read the textbook, beyond those things that are pure fact, consider the person who's writing it and consider that some of the statements they might be made are slanted. Again, nothing against this author, but every textbook you ought to go at it in that fashion. The other thing is she has these historical interludes occasionally between chapters. And for this particular one, prior to chapter 1, beginning on page 2, is one of those historical interludes. It talks about broad strokes, big picture kind of thing as far as philosophy is concerned. So try to read those because those are actually very interesting and I think provide a lot of good background material. Now in this first chapter, I'm not going to go over all the various concepts or ideas, primarily because she does a very good job at detailing those out, especially times, places, ideas, that kind of thing. But I do want to hit on a few points. One is the chapter begins with really what is philosophy. Philosophy, as you know, as you've read and you probably had heard before, come from two Greek words, philo and sophia. Philo means love of, and Sophia comes from the Greek meaning wisdom. So it means love of wisdom. It really deals with the fundamental questions of life. Why am I here? What am I supposed to be doing? Is this real? Is life here real? Is this all there is? So it deals with all of these fundamental basic questions about life. Now, it goes further than that. It goes into even deeper things like reality. How do we know what we know? Having known what we know, what values then do we use to make decisions in life? That area called ethics. So there's a lot of different components to philosophy. One of its greatest contributions is logic, which towards the end of chapter 1, she talks a little bit about that. But as you consider the text, not so much chapter 1, but subsequent texts or subsequent chapters, it's going to get into much more about the nuts and bolts of philosophy and some of the questions that are asked and some of the issues that are to be covered. In this first chapter, she hits on both Eastern philosophy as well as Western philosophy. She argues that Eastern philosophy was one of the starting points of Western philosophy. In particular, she talks a bit about Aristotle, Plato, Socrates. Now understand, Socrates was one of the early philosophers who is well known for what we today call the Socratic method. And what that is asking a series of questions. And by asking those questions, you eventually come to a truth. Now, Socrates argues that everyone is born with this truth. So, given the right set of questions, then ultimately the truth is revealed. It's not something that is taught, it is something that is revealed. That's not real different, believe it or not, from some of the types of tools that modern day industry uses. For example, Toyota has their Camry plant here in Georgetown, Kentucky, which is just 20 minutes from here. And I got to tour it when it first opened up. And it was really interesting because everyone on the line in building the car had the power to stop the line if they saw something that was wrong. And once they found something wrong, they went through a 7 why process. Now, not the letter Y, but WHY. And they would say, number 1, why did you stop the line? And the person would say, well, I saw a defect. Why is the defect there? And then they discover that. Why did that person mess up on the defect? Or why did they cause the defect, etc. And they believe that no more than 7 whys are required to find the problem and to then resolve it. So it's the same kind of Socratic method where a series of questions is asked. Plato then, on the other hand, comes along and somewhat furthers that whole idea, but changes some. And you'll notice this between Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle, and as well as any other, not just persons, but major thoughts. They follow what I call the pendulum theory, and many of you have heard of that. And you can see this particularly in things like politics. For example, let's go back to Clinton. Here's Clinton, and pretty far left, although he claimed that he was more moderate. Then comes George Bush, who is much more further right, conservative, although he claimed to be somewhat moderate too. And then after Bush comes President Obama, who most would argue is far left. So what you can see is this pendulum theory going back and forth from conservative to liberal, liberal to conservative, though many of them, if not all of them, at least confess to a moderate position. So the same thing happens with just about everything in life. Begin recognizing those things, and just it's really interesting to watch how that pendulum theory happens. But it happens in thoughts as well, between how Aristotle held things to what Plato believed in, to what what Socrates believed in, to what Plato believed in, and then Aristotle believed in. There was also another movement called the pluralist, I can't say that real well, and the monists. The monists basically believed that you could reduce life to one thing. In other words, there would be one source. Initially, they believed water. Everything could be reduced down to water. And then ultimately, the monists became to the point where they believed in something called atoms, those things which constructed life, which were beyond breakable. In other words, that was the lowest key element to all of life. The pluralists, though, again following the pendulum theory, went the other extreme and said, no, there are multiple things that make up life. And in particular, they believed in fire, water, wind, I believe, and earth. I think that was the 4. I don't know right off. You can look in your book and it'll explain it better. But they believed that there were 4 components to life. So as philosophy began to really take off, this whole idea of what life is composed of, the things that not only make up life, but that constitute life. In other words, again, why am I here? And how do I know what I know? And given what I know, what am I supposed to do with it? Plato is the one who argued that all we see in life is nothing but a shadow. And he gave one of the most famous illustrations in all of philosophy. And his metaphor, or his analogy, was, imagine several people sitting in a cave, and they're bound in such a way that they can only see one wall of the cave. And behind them is a fire, and as other people pass by the fire, The people who are bound looking at the wall see nothing but shadows. So Plato argued that that's what life is for us, that what we see is shadows. We don't see the real life, the reality that is. The argument went that, everyone had a different reality because everyone was looking at different shadows. Well, to not to put a too fine a point on it, philosophy deals with things that are a little bit more ethereal like that. What is reality? Is this webcam that I'm talking into, is it real, or is it something different, but I happen to perceive it to be real? Some of you already may be saying, oh my gosh, what is this stuff? All we're talking about is things that seem like argument for argument's sake. And candidly, that's what I feel too on some of this stuff. But it also answers the great questions in life, the ones I already mentioned. And it does raise an awareness to us about what is reality. Think about this. For example, I'm a big UK basketball fan, University of Kentucky. And the biggest reason is because there's not a whole lot else to do in this state. No, I'm just kidding. I'm actually a UK grad, and one of the things I love is UK basketball. And we're in the Final Four this year, which is really exciting. But when I watch a game with UK versus any other team, what I'm going to perceive as reality is that the other team fouled, or they walked with the ball, that the ref missed a call, etc. Well, that's because I'm a UK fan, and my perception is the other team is the bad guys, and they're the ones messing up. The opposing team and their fans would probably see the exact opposite, that Kentucky is making fouls and that they're walking with the ball and they're doing all these different things that are wrong. Again, a matter of perspective. So whose reality is correct? So that's the kind of question that philosophy tries to get at. Now, for your quiz that's coming up, it's going to be allowed to be an open book. So I'm not going to go over a lot of these details for this first chapter. As a matter of fact, all of your quizzes are going to be open book, open note. But let me encourage you, these chapters go into a great deal of depth, and some of these questions aren't easily found. So it's very important that you read through the chapter, noting those things that are important. And some of the things that are important, of course, are bold in the textbook. So again, this first chapter, I'm not going to give much of a lecture because all of it's written down in the textbook, and it doesn't really go into many other ideas. It's basically fact-driven. So hopefully this was of some help to you, and again, the quiz coming up, I think you're going to do just fine on it. It is timed, it's 30 minutes, and there's about 20 questions there, so you should be able to do that in plenty of time. And good luck, and I'll be talking to you very soon. Thanks.